So hopefully everyone did type in the bell ringer here. What did you learn about needed changes for the articles? And you can see number one, make sure that you complete the Government 2 Constitution assignment. And where it says highlight, make sure you highlight significant adjectives, nouns, and verbs. And then where there's a list of numbers, of course, you're just typing in the most significant items. For the notes for today, about halfway through, we'll cover the Constitutional Convention. And then in the second half, make sure you've completed and submitted the Government 2 reading. Make sure you submit the notes because we'll be done with them at that point. And then don't forget to take the quizzes. So today should be the day to wrap up everything. Next week, we'll take the test on Thursday. We'll work on a study guide. We'll do a review. And we will have just a little project for the first 3 weeks as well. So go ahead and begin. If you're already done with the Constitution, you can do one of these other things. And then about halfway through in 25 minutes, we'll take the notes. So once again, we'll go over the Constitutional Convention, the setup, the debates, and the structure. Constitutional Convention. It was from May through September of 1787. So it wasn't written overnight. May through September of 1787. So notice this is more than 10 years after the Declaration of Independence. The meetings were kept secretive. They didn't want conspiracy theories about some brand new power being created or people's rights being taken away. So they kept the meetings secretive. And there were 55 delegates. Not necessarily there all at once. Some of them, of course, came and went, but altogether it would be 55 delegates that would participate. And these delegates were, of course, educated people. They were literate. Some of them had formal schooling. Others had private tutoring through their families or had educated themselves. And the most significant out of these people would be someone we mentioned yesterday, James Madison. Thomas Jefferson is known as the father of the Declaration. James Madison is known as the father of the Constitution. And we mentioned yesterday that he studied government a lot. He believed that people were selfish and that government was needed basically to keep that in check. People were selfish and government was necessary to keep people in check. George Washington will end up being the leader of the convention because he was considered neutral and respectable. People respected him because of his leadership during the War for Independence. And they would try to concentrate on specific topics throughout the time from May through September. So they weren't hashing out every topic every day. They concentrated on certain matters at a time. So the debates. People who became known as the Federalists wanted a strong central government. The Federalists wanted a strong central government. The Anti-Federalists wanted to keep the Articles and the state-based system. So the Anti-Federalists wanted to keep the Articles with a state-based system. Obviously, the Constitution passed, so the Federalists won. So we already know who won that debate. The next debate is big states versus small states. Big states versus small states. Because obviously, each of them had their own ideas about representation. Virginia was one of the big states. They said that the legislature should be based on population. And of course, they had the most people, so they were going to end up getting the most representatives. So Virginia wanted it to be based on population. New Jersey, though, had fewer people. And so they thought every state should continue just to get one vote. So New Jersey proposed that every state get one vote. Now, one way to compromise is to meet halfway in between. Another way to compromise, of course, is to take both parts and put them together, and that's exactly what would happen. Connecticut would propose that we have a Congress with two parts, one that represented Virginia's needs and one that represented New Jersey's. So the compromise is that we would have a two-part Congress. Anybody know what that's called when the Congress has two parts? It's called bicameral. So this bicameral Congress would have a House that represents population. That's what Virginia wanted. And a Senate that represents statehood. That's what New Jersey wanted. Except they didn't go with one vote per state in the Senate. They went with how many? Two? Yes, two. So the Senate actually has two votes per state. So they combined both New Jersey and Virginia's plans. The next debate was whether or not slaves should be counted in the population. Should slaves be counted? Now you might think, well, obviously the North would want them to be counted. They were against slavery, but actually that would be incorrect. It was the South that wanted to count them, because if they counted them, what would they get?
A bigger number.
Yeah, it's a bigger number in the House of Representatives, and then they could use that to help protect slavery. So the South wanted to count slaves, while the North basically said, no, if you're not going to give them any rights, then you shouldn't be able to count them in your population. So the North was opposed. Now, in this case, they ended up going somewhere in between the two.
Isn't that like the 3/5 compromise?
Yes. They would end up counting slaves as 3/5 of a person. 3/5 of a person. Now, what does that mean, mathematically speaking? Who won more in this debate?
The South did.
Yes, the South, because 3/5 is greater than 1/2. So the South got more what they wanted than the North did. So the 3/5 compromise. Now, there were many other debates that went on, like over the presidency, for instance. Should we have a king-like person, or should we have a committee of people? And so we ended up settling on a president that would be elected for 4-year terms. Although when the country first began, there were no term limits. So the president could stay in for life as long as they kept getting elected. But of course, we changed that later. And then some other debates as well. But then it came time for ratification. They wanted to require 9 out of 13 states, like the Articles required for passing laws. But the Federalists knew it was important for all the states to join. It needed to be unanimous. And so the Federalists wrote a series of papers to persuade people.
Didn't like Hamilton write like around like 40 or 50 of these?
He did write a considerable number of the Federalist Papers, yes. So they wrote a series of papers to convince people to push their leaders to support the Constitution. And it worked, because all of the states did end up approving the Constitution, because the Federalists were well organized and they had some incredible advocates like Hamilton, for instance, James Madison. And even though George Washington didn't write any of those, he was considered a hero and he favored this new Constitution as well. So the last part that I want to mention, of course, would be the structure. And I'll just give you a simple way of remembering the different parts of the Constitution. Let me just put it up on the screen here for you. There are 7 articles of the Constitution. The first one covers the legislative branch. So Article 1 is all about the legislative branch. So you can summarize it with one word. Article 2 is about the executive branch. So all of Article 2 is about the executive branch. So you can summarize it with that one word. And then obviously the third one is about what? Judicial branch, yes. So Article 3 is about the judicial branch. So if you want to know about Congress, you would look in Article 1. If you want to know about the president or the cabinet, you look in Article 2. If you want to know about the Supreme Court, you look in Article 3. But there are 4 other articles. The fourth one basically says that states must recognize each other.
As like legal entities?
Yes. So that's why if you get married in Pennsylvania and you move to Vermont, your marriage license is still valid. Or if you're just going on vacation, you drive cross country. Each state that you go to, you don't have to get a new driver's license. If you move there, you do. But citizens, basically their certificates, their documents, and other things are at least recognized in cases of driver's license and occupation temporarily, and other things like marriage, they're recognized for life in all of the states. The 5th article is about the amending process, how to change the Constitution. And it actually gives a couple ways of doing that, but we've only ever used one way. The amendments have to be approved by 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states. That's a pretty steep hill to climb, and that's why it's only been amended 27 times. And then Article 6 says that the Constitution has supremacy. In other words, it's the supreme law of the land. No other laws can override the Constitution. And then, of course, Article 7 set up ratification. It gave a 9 out of 13 requirement, but all of the 13 ended up approving it. One of the concerns of some of the last-minute deciders about the Constitution was this new big government could take away our rights. So the Federalists promised to add the Bill of Rights, which would include these 10 items here. And you don't have to type that whole thing at the top. You can just put Bill of Rights. And the first one, if you can remember all the rights, you can just type freedom of expression. But that includes speech, press, assembly, petition, and religion. Amendment 2, of course, includes bear arms. Bear arms. Going back to the Revolutionary period, we wanted to make sure that there was no quartering of troops. And of course, warrants are required in Article 4, except in cases, of course, of probable cause. Amendment 5 includes a number of things, but probably the most significant is the right to remain silent. You don't have to testify against yourself or confess things. Amendment 6 includes a lot of our trial rights. You have the right to a speedy public trial. It can't be in secret. You can't just be held in prison indefinitely. And of course, you have the right to call witnesses or question ones that the government puts forward. Amendment 7 is your right to a jury even in civil cases. So even in lawsuits over a certain amount, you have the right to a jury. And amendment number 8, cruel and unusual punishment is forbidden. And then when they got to the end of this list, they realized, well, if we only make this list of rights, people might think these are the only ones we have. So in Amendment 9, they also protected rights not named. And then making sure that the state still retains some of their power, Amendment 10 basically says unnamed powers, so powers not given to this new national government, would fall to the states. That's why transportation, health, education, voting, and lots of other things, local police work, all of that falls to the states.